Okay. Ilia Delio is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and an American theologian specializing in the area of science and religion with interests in evolution, physics, and neuroscience, and the import for these for theology. Ilia currently holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University and is the author of 20 books, including Care for Creation, which is the topic for tonight's lecture, which won 2 Catholic Press Book Awards in 2009, first place for social concerns and second place in spirituality. Her book, The Emergent Christ, won a 3rd place Catholic Press Book Award in 2011 for the area of science and religion. Her recent books include The Unbearable Wholeness of Being, God, Evolution, and the Power of Love. I'd love to hear more about that in relation to The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which received the 2014 Silver Nautilus Book Award and a 3rd place Catholic Press Association Award for Faith and Science. Ilia holds 2 honorary doctorates, one from St. Francis University in 2015 and one from Sacred Heart University in 2020. We're in good hands with Ilia tonight. She's an expert, she's great, and we'll have a blast. So we'll have about 30 minutes of a lecture, about 15 minutes or so for Q&A, and then we'll have you guys off in time for house meeting, okay? All right, sister, over to you.
Muted here. There I am. I'm unmuted. Well, first of all, I think it's wonderful that you're showing up on a Friday night for a lecture on care for creation. It says a lot. I hope you're not under duress to do so, but this is a very important topic. So I do have some slides. I think sometimes slides help us to bring points more clearly into focus. So if you can make me a co-share or co-host, I shall move to the slides and then kind of relate to you a narrative. And I found Mr. Fisher's introductory remarks quite interesting on Descartes and Locke. I think they're worthy to keep in mind. So if I'm going to move to screen share, okay, and if I am co-host, then I think we're good to go.
I think you should be good, yep.
Okay, very good. So I just have to find my, here we are. So I just want to, let's see, raise this up a little bit. Oops. Yeah, let me just do this and do this. Yeah. So I don't think it's any great surprise that, you know, this is our reality today, right? This is a scene from the flood from last year. And I want to say, I forget exactly which city it is. I didn't mark the city, but we were seeing more and more events like this. And of course, global warming is a reality. I mean, much of the scientific data points to the increase of a warming trend, which is giving rise to extreme heat and desertification. It's giving rise to depletion of the glaciers, the melting of the glaciers, and the displacement of species such as the polar bears. And of course, the poor are being affected disproportionately, in a sense, by global warming. So I don't think it's an overestimate to say that the Earth is in crisis. And we've known this for quite some time. Quite honestly, in 1990, a group of scientists wrote a thing called Crimes Against Creation. And they said, if we don't change our ways, you know, we're in for a very dire future. And of course, Pope Francis brings this out in his 2015 encyclical on Laudato Si, right, on care for our common home. And, you know, that's a remarkable encyclical by the Pope because he's calling to our attention that if we don't change our ways, if we don't shift our lifestyles, we're on the brink of a crisis, a deteriorating situation, which is on the brink of disaster. And of course, global warming tops the charts, but water crisis, and not to mention water pollution, the amount of plastics in the ocean is alarming. The loss of biodiversity. We have lost a significant number of species due to deforestation and other types of consumeristic practices. We have lost the quality of human life as excess carbons in the atmosphere and pollutants that still abound cause an effect on all types of life. And so the problem is we have developed a lifestyle that really has created the conditions for crisis. our ecological footprint, I hope you've all at some point taken the ecological footprint test because it's quite revealing. Everything from what you eat, how far you walk, or if you drive, you know, how much earth space we take up in our daily lives. And of course, in North America, our ecological footprint is about 23% larger than what the planet can regenerate. So that if everyone lived like an American, it would take about 6 planets. So it's just not possible. And we can't continue on this way. So Pope Francis in Laudato Si challenges us to think of the earth as our home. And that's a very insightful statement, because while we know this is our home, Christianity has really, in a sense, taught us there's another home, the true home that is in heaven. And so we've kind of developed this kind of two-tiered mentality that we're living on earth, but we're really going to heaven. And, you know, Christianity itself sort of developed in a vertical manner, you know, as we make our way, you know, from earth to heaven. Even cathedrals were built with very high ceilings, like the Washington Cathedral in Washington, D.C., you know, beautiful Gothic structure with 100-foot high ceilings. But when we build structures like that, our attention is lifted away from earth and up toward heaven. And so we began to pray like this. We began to shape our lives that this earth is just passing away. It's fallen. It's kind of, you know, weak. And we long for a better life elsewhere. And so the question is, where is our true home? That's our big question. Is it the earth? Is it this universe? Or are we focused on some otherworldly place that we think will be better than this one? Of course, modern science really holds out a whole new narrative for us that challenges the traditional Christian story of a fixed earth that God created with, you know, a couple of called Adam and Eve and a fall. Here we have ourselves in a Big Bang cosmos that is very, very old, about 13.8 billion years old, with a beginning that scientists themselves can hardly understand. It's rather mysterious how this universe emerged. But it did emerge billions of years ago, and it has been unfolding ever since. Long periods of time, billion years to expand this universe. And, oh, I hear my phone. And will continue expanding far into the future. And so we're part of this universe. And what quantum physics tells us is that this is a world of energy. This is a world that the fundamental structures of life, thanks to Einstein's theory of relativity, shows us that matter is a form of energy. And energy is deeply interconnected, right? The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, I think, is very fascinating insofar as, you know, when Einstein developed his theory, but he had a lot of questions about it. You know, his famous saying that God does not play dice, that, you know, nature is not just one of chance, that there is some sort of design in nature. And other scientists said, no, not really. You know, like Schrodinger said, there seems to be, in a sense, uncertainty in nature, that the minute you try to measure something else, you know, another dimension of that particle changes. And so quantum physics has opened for us, in a sense, the mystery of matter. Two of Einstein's students said, well, you know, if particles have interacted in this world of energy, and if we separate those particles and we move one particle up, the other particle will move down, which means that anything that has interacted in this universe will forever interact. That in quantum entanglement, the measurement of one aspect of that entanglement affects the other aspect. So the measurement on A doesn't, it actually produces a state in B. So this notion of entanglement means that once we are interacted, we are forever interacting. And we call this, or the scientists call this non-local action at a distance. Or as one psychologist said, those who fire together wire together. Even our neurons interact. The physicist Paul Dirac gave this lecture in 1933, And he was trying to just say, look, this material universe is so deeply interconnected. Even if you pick a flower on Earth, you will move the farthest star. So it means that everything about us affects the universe. Even our thoughts affects the universe. And that seems so fantastic to us who have developed an understanding of ourselves as autonomous and independent, and no one knows what I think, and my actions don't matter. And in fact, they do matter. They matter to matter, we could say. And so this quantum reality that we find ourselves in today says to us essentially that nature is not composed of material substances, but nature is really deeply entangled fields of energy. Fields within fields, holes within holes, so that the nature of the universe is really undivided wholeness. And we humans are part of this wholeness. And I think this is something that we do not have a consciousness of quite yet. Yet David Bohm, another physicist, said, we're so interconnected with this material universe that, you know, as human beings in societies, we seem separate, but in our roots, we are part of an indivisible whole and share in the same cosmic process. So we North Americans, South Americans, Europeans, Africans, Chinese are in a sense one with flowers and dandelions and quarks and leptons. And there's this whole within a whole that is an amazing process of life. And it is a process. And the thing about the universe we live in, it's not static, it's dynamic. And so, you know, the discovery of evolution in the 19th century, biological evolution, really opened up for us the fact that life does not work, is not just fixed and unchanging, right? Certainly biological life is not fixed or mechanistic, it's dynamic and changing. And I take evolution to mean really the unfolding of life in its broadest sense, so that we can say that nature is constantly at play. But what it means to live in evolution is a really interesting question. It means that we humans are unfinished. We human beings are not the last line of like biological life. We are being created as we create. And so life itself is always oriented toward newness and toward the future. And it won't go back. As far as we know, this universe, unless really the Big Bang universe somehow just, you know, decides to converge and then time moves in a different direction. But as far as we know, we're going to keep expanding, we're going to keep complexifying, and life evolves by creative power. So we humans, our evolution become conscious of itself. We are, each one of us is the universe on, you might say, this particular level of human life. We can reflect on the universe that has given rise to us, that has, in a sense, everything about us is within the universe, and yet we have the capacity to know the universe, to reflect on it, and therefore to make choices for how life in the universe proceeds. So we're in evolution. And of course, the fastest evolver today is technology. And there's a whole story, I think, why technology has, in a sense, emerged as our fastest evolver. Just so you know, technology and ecology as movements sort of emerged around the same time, which would be the late 50s, early 60s. Ecology never really took off. I mean, it's still moving rather slowly, whereas technology has been like a gazelle over the mountains, right? We've moved from, I remember when the first cell phone came out that you held in your hand, it was about a foot long. And someone said, they're going to make computers that fit into phones. And I said, what is a computer? And so today, you guys and girls are born, you know, with computers practically in your hand. So you're born, you're digital natives talking to an analog right now. And so we have created for ourselves a way to extend ourselves with technology. And it's very interesting here because if the ancients looked to heaven, to that place of perfection, that place that would be better than this one. There's something about cyberspace that does the same thing for us. There's something out there that's not here. And so we have become not just simply addicted to our devices, they're part of ourselves, they're extensions of ourselves. And yet we haven't reflected sufficiently to say, what are they doing to us and what are they doing to our attention to the earth? So Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Our Technologies and Less from One Another. And she says, you know, we begin to respond to machines not as tools, but as role models to emulate. And she says, as people are acting upon this tendency, the isolation and loneliness of modern life is being increased. I mean, it's so interesting. Here we have kind of a conference together, and we're together and yet not. So technology has an illusion sometimes of togetherness. And we have to think about this some more. You know, cyber relations are great. I mean, let's face it, texting and emailing and Zoom has saved us in a pandemic. But it's how we use technology, because we can also hide behind our screens, right? We can construct who we are, false identities. And therefore, when we can control our relationships, we have no place for the grace of conversion, and we're not yet ready or attuned to the wildness of nature itself. Nicholas Carr says he thinks that technology is making us more shallow, that we're losing depth and the ability to think, or the loss of creativity. Yes and no. I'm not sure I entirely buy Carr's argument, but I think we have to be careful that, you know, we don't want to lose that capacity to imagine and dream what this world can become. So I think, you know, technology is held out to us to question, you know, how much of myself is lost in cyberspace, and am I aware of the people around me? Am I aware of the trees outside my window? Again, as Turkle says, we're in the process of making one another disappear by living our lives more apart from humans in the company of machines. And so the question is, therefore, when we come to creation, how will we care for creation in an age of technology? That's our key question. And it's a question of where one's mind is, right? From the words of the gospel, where your mind is, where your heart is, there your treasure lies. And the question is, well, where are our minds? So here I just want to bring up maybe, you know, two very holy people who can, you know, who show us the way how to get back to the mind and focus the mind on what, you know, what is really worth living for. Francis of Assisi and the Buddha. The Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. That saying is definitely worth pondering. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. You can say the same thing about love. What you love, you become, right? We become what we love. For Francis of Assisi, he focused his mind on the person of Jesus. He fell in love with Jesus, basically. And he made Jesus the single-hearted focus of his life. So Jesus was always with him in his heart, in his mouth, in his ears, in his hands, in his whole body. He was very strong about this, like Jesus was his life. And therefore he's like, I will give up everything that gets in the way of being with Jesus. So he developed this notion of poverty, not just material poverty, like I'm going to give away my clothes. Poverty is how we relate to others, how we relate to other things and to other people. So if Locke and Descartes said we need to possess nature, Francis of Assisi would said, no, you must be poor in the face of nature. You must let things be what they are. And he said we must live not without possessions, but without possessing, right? We tend to control and possess things. But Francis of Assisi said, no, we must let go and recognize our need for one another, which is exactly what he did. He let go of the need to control, and he allowed things to be what they are, recognizing that all aspects of our lives, right, every aspect of nature, all people, they're all gifts, and we are to receive the gift and share that gift. Francis of Assisi is a great model. It's no wonder that Pope Francis has taken St. Francis as his patron. because he saw himself as part of creation. As he came to know the God of his own life, he began to see that God in all creatures. And therefore, he began to identify with sheep and goats and lambs as brother and sister. So he didn't see himself as better than the natural world. He saw the natural world as his family, because he realized the source of his life was the source of all created things and all that exists. And I guess that's a key for us. Like, who is, what do I live for? That's really the question. Who is the source of my life? And is that source the source of your life as well? Because if that's true, then we're related. For Francis, because he began to see these footprints of God in creation, he could see the goodness of God in every creature. Nothing was worthless or trivial. Like, it wasn't just, oh, this fly is in my face and I need to get rid of it. It's rather each and everything, no matter how small, had infinite value because it reflected God in its own unique beingness. Do we see? It's always a question of seeing. How do we see the world? Francis of Assisi saw the world as the place where God was dwelling, where God's love radiates, so that even for worms, his biographer writes, he had a warm love. He would, because he read in scripture, I am a worm and not a man. He used to pick them up from the road and put them in a safe place so they would not be crushed by the foot of passersby. Or he would, when he found flowers, he used to preach to them and invite them to praise the Lord as if they were endowed with reason. In our own time, we would do things like this and people say, boy, that person's really crazy, right? They're picking up worms and they're talking to flowers. But for Francis, he had a great sense that God was here in this flower, in this worm, because he saw that God, the God who created us, is the God who is with us and one of us. So he saw the footprints of God on creation, right? On all aspects. And we too see them as well, but we don't recognize them. I think when we see the beauty of a sunset or the wind in our face, we are already experiencing the presence of God. So again, our minds are creating the world, how we're thinking about the world, and rather than the world just creating us. Gerard Manley Hopkins was a Jesuit poet who spent a long, long time, like Francis of Assisi, just pondering nature. He would sit for hours before trees. He would just take time to just soak in the waterfall, and he came to realize that the world is charged with the grandeur of God. That's a wonderful saying. The world is charged. It's filled with the grandeur of God, with the beauty of God, the wisdom of God. Francis of Assisi, seeing the same thing towards the end of his life. As a blind man, by the way, he wrote this poem, blind and near death. He realizes that God is in all of creation. Praise be you, my Lord, through sister water, which is useful and humble and chaste, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, through our sister mother earth, who produces fruits and colored flowers and herbs. Every part of nature belongs to us because we belong to it. We belong to nature. We belong to the water, to the fire, to the earth. We are born out of these elements, and these elements are part of us. So we have to really, I think, take hold of where our minds are. And as you're, in school right now, probably a little bit brain fatigued already, we live in this information age where we kind of load our little brains up with all sorts of information. And we don't allow ourselves the space just to be, right? Just to be with the wind and the sun. And I think that's how Francis of Assisi and the Buddha developed their sense of light, goodness. We have to develop, like them, a Buddha brain, right? A brain that's focused on the goodness of the earth, on the goodness of people, on the goodness of our own lives. And so we have to kind of awaken that right brain. We're very left brain people. We're very analytical and logical. And yet the right brain is the brain of passion and creativity. It's the brain that can help unify our openness to life. So it's a question of really, we're in this kind of exoskeletal life, right? A lot of our lives are lived outside us. They're extended in this cyberspace world. It's not all bad. I mean, I think of Greta Thunberg's, youth climate movement that was done through social media. Fantastic, right? And yet we have to train our mind. We have to unplug from our devices at times to realize to awaken our senses, basically, our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, our sense of touch, of the real world. And therefore, I think, we need something like a contemplative engagement with technology and with the earth itself. And that means always coming to a deeper sense, first of all, of who we are and who God is in us, that inner life. Solitude is a great thing, right? Solitude, not just being alone, but being alone with God, and just enjoying the moments of time in a space. We need cyber fasts. We need to unplug from our devices periodically and just go into nature, just sit outside or sit with a plant. I used to have students actually just have a conversation with a plant. Prayer is good, right? Contemplation, to dwell in God. You don't have to talk a lot. You just have to be there. Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, he said, the external deserts of the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. And he calls us to profound interior conversion. That's worth pondering. The external deserts of the world are increasing because our internal deserts are diminishing. So I think, as we live in this Big Bang universe, as we live in a very interconnected universe, we have to rethink and refeel this earth as our home. And of course, the old adage, home is where the heart is. And if the earth is our home, is our heart here? I think we have to ask ourselves that. St. Bonaventure once said, you truly exist where you love and not merely where you live. If we love this home, we will care for this home, right? And, as one scholar said, we're here in a sense temporarily, right? In a sense, there'll be other people who will come after us. So we have to leave this home in good shape for those who will follow us. Of course, heaven is not a place above us. It is the openness of earth to its fulfillment in God. The scriptures always promise, God promises a new heaven and a new earth, not a new heaven without earth. So if we're looking for heaven someplace, we won't find it. Only a life, lived truthfully on earth can open itself to heaven. I think sin is living in the exile of unrelatedness. Sin is where we become selfish. We become turned in on ourselves, disconnected from the whole that we're a part of. And so that is the reality. And that's, I think, the beauty of the new science story today, that we're part of a creative whole of unlimited potential, whereby ourself and our world are constantly being drawn into new existence together. I think God is part of this whole, both as creator of the whole and as the future of the whole into which we're moving. And so, as Thomas Berry said, we will go into the future as a single sacred community, or we will all perish in the desert. There won't be, some who are saved because they had super intelligence or had better technology. Every act of our lives affects every other act of the human life and the planetary life. And so we are in this together. And so our task right now is to find a way into a sustainable future together. Thank you. So.
Wonderful. Oh man, I have so many questions. And so It's just like you've mentioned my favorite people. You got St. Francis in there. You got Hopkins in there. Oh my goodness. But anyways, I could ask a lot of questions. I'll maybe ask one to get us started, and then
Sure.
we can throw it open to the students. One of my favorite poems, Percival, the first story of the Grail, from the 1300s, has this great opening scene where you're introduced to Percival, one of the main character of it, who has to go on this Grail quest. But anyways, it has this line, and this is medieval 1300s, and one of the lines is, "The season was spring, trees were sprouting leaves, meadows were green every morning, birds sang in their own sweet language, and the world was joyful," right? This like great scene of just like an enchanted natural world, right? How much of that kind of enchanted world of the Christian imagination that we got in the late Middle Ages, how much of that was lost because of the Enlightenment? How much of that relied on kind of a Christian worldview, like you were saying, where the world is created? I mean, what do we do with that in this kind of post-Enlightenment world?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, the relationship between science and religion is a little bit more complex sometimes than we make it out to be. It's not just that, Copernicus discovered heliocentrism in the earth, and the church said, "Oh no, we don't like that." The church always was a supporter of the sciences, certainly up into the beginning of it, of the rise of modern science. And I think what happened, there's several things. One, I think the Galileo affair is a watershed, insofar as Galileo, using better tools of measurement and able to ask more precise questions, really shifted. And I think what happened with modern science, we shifted, first of all, our sense of telos, like we have a purpose here. We're going somewhere. We're going to heaven. We're going to God. And science said, no, we don't want final causality. We want to know, like, how did this work, right? We want efficient causality, like, what makes this clock tick? We're not interested in why the clock, exists at all. So I think that's a shift that took place. Galileo's famous saying, the Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. So, scripture was never meant to be a science book. But I think also with that came the Protestant Enlightenment. And I think with the Protestant Reformation, rather, we have this turn towards scripture away from a church authority, but it was also this rely on inner authority. So you have a turn to the subject of that Descartes, his own. And all of this to say is, once we began to realize, hey, we can reason, we can figure things out. I don't need some church to tell me, how to think. I don't need the Pope telling me how to pray. I have logic, I have reason. And now really, who needs God, right? As Simone de Laplace, I think it was de Laplace or Napoleon said, we no longer have reason to have the hypothesis of God. We can now use mathematics, and we have tools of measurement. So it's a gradual disenchantment of nature. Lynn White, the historian, said, he says, Protestant Christianity made us so focused on sin that it made us very kind of guilt-ridden and very heaven-oriented. All but humans were excluded from grace, right? So creation, like nature, is just what I need, to function, but nature has no value in itself. And it's that kind of thinking, so these are just points over time to say it's a complex unraveling from the earth. And I think it will take time I think we're doing actually pretty well, because technology, for all its downside, is actually making us more aware of, in many things. But I do think the new science story is very helpful, to realize that the deep connectedness of all life on this planet and in the universe gives us a whole new sense of what it means to be human. We're not just the lone rangers and the powerful ones in the universe. I think we need a sense of humility.
That's great. Thank you. All right, students, if you have any questions, just feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, and please ask questions. I know my group. Hannah, yeah, go for it, Hannah.
So this is going back a little bit. You were talking about evolution and how man evolved and how technology evolved and how all of that affected like our worldview and stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting. But would you say that technology is still like an advancement, or did it almost kind of bring us back?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Technology is not just a tool in my use. You know, many people say, oh, technology is just a tool that will help us. First of all, nature itself is techne. Nature always, even before we arrived on the scene, right? Beavers, you know, develop ways to build dams. Like, so nature has within it built-in means to develop things to not only extend life, but to flourish, right? Technology is ultimately, I think, about oriented toward the flourishing of life by nature. Now, we developed technology, I think, just so you know, AI technology developed in the midst of, on the heels of World War II. So it develops out of violence, basically. And I think the 20th century was such a violent century of war and destruction. I think there was a sense within the human that, you know, we can't stay here. We have to find a way, in a sense, to move beyond what we are. And so we invented, you know, the computer as a thinking machine. We discovered that. We discovered, in a sense, what information was about. And discovering information and cybernetic theory and complex systems, we were able then to begin to extend ourselves through technology. I see technology as not just an extension of ourselves, it's the next level of evolution. We will become something new with technology. So the question is like, the question is then, what will we become with technology? Are we going to become androids? Are we going to become robots? I hope not, because I think we can use technology and orient it toward becoming our better human selves. We can become more human if we orient it that way. Anyway, I don't know if that helps your answer, but it's a good one. Yeah, Liam, and then Kylie,
yeah.
and then Anna.
This is going back to kind of Mr. Fisher's question about kind of the relationship, I guess, between religion and science.
Yeah.
And this is something I've kind of struggled with personally to kind of understand. But how do you view, I suppose, the two contrasts between what the Bible says, for example, with kind of the creation of man versus what science says with the evolution of man?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think the Bible is not meant to be taken literally. It is a descriptive story. The early church the ancient writers were trying to understand, you know, how do we, like we do, like, why are we here? How do we get here? And so, you know, I think they are to be interpreted. The Bible is to be interpreted, but it's a narrative about relationship with God. I don't think that conflicts with science at all, and it shouldn't. So if science says we evolved, you know, we're here in a 4.2 billion year Earth, or 4.6 billion year, we emerge out of lower forms of life. We have a lot of ancestors before us. So our question is, well, maybe God just didn't say, you know, abracadabra, there's Adam and Eve, and here we are. Maybe God works by another way, much more slowly. Maybe God works through evolution. You know, God works in a way that respects the laws of nature. And we need to rethink, therefore, how we interpret scripture in light of modern science. I think these are two ways of knowing reality, and they should not conflict with one another at all. They should be mutually interacting. Let's see, who else had? Kylie and then Anna.
So since we can control like so much of our lives through technology, do you think as humans our constant use of technology carries us away from like God's plan for us as individuals?
It can, Kylie, and that's right. That's a very good question, actually. That's in a sense what I was trying to point to. So cyber, as we go on our cell phones, right, and we're looking like what's happening on my, you know, in this social media site and this social media site, and we're looking for friends, we're looking for connections, we're looking for what? You know, what are we looking for that maybe is already within us, right? You know, And here's what all I'm saying is that we spend so much time on our devices and not enough time just being with ourselves, right? Being with that God who is within us. And I do think we have to use technology a little bit more wisely. I think we sort of have an unbridled use of it. It's changing our attention spans. We're much less attentive. I mean, scientists have shown that we're more aggressive, that there is, our attention spans are decreasing. And so the brain is shifting. I mean, that's known, right? We're having neurological shifts from our continuous use of technology. And it depends what brain centers we would like strengthened. Maybe we can strengthen compassion or peacemaking as well with technology. All I'm saying is that we have to make choices to unplug, and we have to make choices just to be with nature. If we are part of nature, I think we have to make a choice for nature. And that means just, putting your cell phone away, turning off the computer, and just go and in being with the stars and the wind and the mountains that give life. Technology is great. I love technology, but it does depend how we shape it. Anna, you had a question.
Yeah, you talked a lot about this crisis that we're living through with global warming and all of the environmental changes and what we can do individually to affect that. What are some things that you think communally we should be doing, or is what we're doing individually going to be, is that going to have a wider communal effect?
Very good. Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's a personal, but communal is your emphasis on community is really important. And I do think it's how we've structured our lives. We have structured them very individualistically. And it's how could we rearrange our living spaces, our resources? Like if you're going to shopping, for food, for example, maybe can you collaborate with someone? Can you grow your own food together? I think I'd love to see a renewal of community today. And get out of our individualistic bubbles. We're in these little bubbles, and if I don't want to be bothered with you and you don't want to be bothered with me type thing, it just doesn't help. What do we even know what it means to be connected, to be really part of, a whole? And I think community can really help us. So find ways to be community. And if you're community, you'll be truly person.
Great. I think we have time maybe for one more question, then these
Okay.
hop off to house meeting.
Some great questions here. Yeah.
One in the chat from.
Yeah. Can you hear us? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. That was me before.
Okay. Does the advancement in technology affect our appreciation for nature? Yeah. Again, it's a very good question. And yes, I think it does in a sense. So it's odd, right? Because technology, I can go on technology and I can read about nature, right? I can watch a YouTube, right? We can watch movies about nature. But nature itself, I think here's the difference. Technology can give us information about nature, but nature requires our senses. We have to touch and smell and taste to know our deep connectivity to nature. And that's where technology can give us the illusion of nature without giving us the true connectivity to nature. Now, I don't want to put them at odds with each other because I think technology can be a great help, certainly in terms of technological achievements that can be used. But it's how we develop technology without losing our senses and our sense for the earth. And I think that's, it's something we have to hold in balance and think about a little bit more and bring into discussion more. I teach a course on technology and human personhood. So if you ever come to Villanova, we could take it. Coming out of the pandemic, would you say this? That's interesting. Have we come closer to nature because of the pandemic? I think we have become more aware of how much we are part of, how much nature can affect us, right? Unless we come into something like a pandemic, we tend to ignore the fact that we're disrupting ecological niches, that we're actually disrupting, the biosphere by our consumer habits. And I think the pandemic definitely has raised, hopefully, about, I'm looking at the questions here, hopefully has raised our awareness that we have to change our habits. We have to change our lifestyles. How do people affect the universe? Well, that's a good one. Yeah. Let me just look at some more questions here. For quarantine, hold it. I know you said the community is the most important part of queer creation, but are there things that we can do now during the pandemic, not as community, that would still have the same effect? Yeah, it's true. I want to say this. Small things can have large effects, right? It's how you care for the small things of life. Do you have a plant in your room, for example? How do you care? Not caring for creation, by the way, is caring for your neighbor as well as caring for yourself, because we're all part of creation, right? So it's everything from, do I just turn on my water and not even think that it's been running, for an hour? Or do I take a shower for an hour, just keep the water running? Do I really care, what I do with my recyclables? And so small things can have large effects. And so I do think personally, our actions can have community reactions. Yes, advancements in technology have affected global warming. I think there's a lot of advancements in technology, by the way, that can alleviate global warming. Technology, by the way, is not the problem. I want to just make that clear. We invent the technology. So what we get out of technology is the desires we put into it. If I develop technology because I want to go to a space station and get out of this Earth, then I want to use technology to get out of here, right? I don't really like Earth. But if I develop technology to help the poor, to alleviate global warming, then I'm using technology to create a better Earth. So technology is not the problem. We're the problem on how we think about technology and what we want with it. That focuses like have Jesus in our mind. Do all these different focuses move us toward? Yes. Focuses are good because a focused mind is an attentive mind. So care for creation is about our level of attention. Are we attentive to, the way, just the way we shop, the way we might, drive our car all over the place, like the way we buy water, bottled water. These actions do affect the earth. So here's the thing about contemplation. If I truly know within me that there's this power, this love that is God, and this God made you as well and made the earth, then the God that I meet within myself, I'm going to meet outside, which means if I focus on the God within me, I will be more attentive to that God around me.
Sister Ilia, we have a lot of questions. I know some of these students have to go off to house meetings. Would you be willing to be on for maybe another 5 minutes and answer?
Sure.
If you don't have to run, students, if you guys have to go, feel free to go. If you have a question or two, you can hang on and we'll try to wrap up in a few minutes, but I want to at least let some
Great questions. Wow, great. So thank you. Let's
David,
see.
David, Sean, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I recently read a story about technological singularity and how people might there might be an exponential growth of technology and people might use that to actually achieve human deification. And I thought that was really different from what we use science for to understand ways of life, and suddenly it changes the paradigm to, heightening us to a better being almost. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, no, David, that's a very good question. So there's a movement. Are you familiar with transhumanism? Transhumanism is a cultural philosophical movement out of Oxford, and some radical transhumanists like Max Moore or Ray Kurzweil or Nick Bostrom, say that we can develop super intelligence, right? That we can, Ray Kurzweil thinks that in 2045, we'll be so merged with our technologies, we will exit Homo sapiens. We will no longer be Homo sapiens sapiens. We'll be techno sapiens or cyber sapiens, which means our technologies will be thinking for us. We'll have chips implanted in our brains and chips in our clothes. And, we're sort of, this is not too far fetched. We are moving in this direction, but one reason we're moving it is because no one ever talks about technology. We have just let technology kind of be its own thing and take over. And we don't have enough discussion about it. So will we reach a singularity? Probably at some point in the future, we will evolve beyond our species. But the question is, can we become a better species? Can we become a more compassionate species? Or will it be a widening of gaps between those who have the money to buy technology, become super intelligent, super whatever, super wealthy, and those who don't have the money and will be sort of collateral damage, so to speak? So I think that's a discussion that needs to be further discussed, quite honestly. And I still think we will probably, have androids. I mean, everything that science is working on today, Silicon Valley, all this stuff, it will probably enter our mainstream at some point in the next 20, 30 years. But what happens to us and where we go with it, it is important that religion get on board with this discussion, right? It's important that, we reframe why we need religion in an age of technology. You mentioned before, David, will we become godlike? That's one of the transhumanists' dictums. And what they say is technology will fulfill what religion promises. Basically, they're saying religion has failed to achieve its aims of salvation and happiness and immortality. Now we can do that with technology. And the question is, yeah.
Sorry, got it. Maybe Sarah Dougal, I know you had a question before. Maybe you can ask our final question, and then we'll wrap it up for the night.
Yeah, I was wondering how you feel about the current use of technology amidst the pandemic, because you had said something about how you feel like people should spend more time away from screens and how you feel like people's attention span is shorter. But I just feel like it was sort of ironic that we're currently on a Zoom call and you brought that up.
Yeah, good, Sarah. Yeah, exactly. So technology, again, it's neither bad nor good. Technology is ambivalent in value. Right now, it's a good, right? It's a good that without technology, I don't know where we would be. We'd be in pure isolation, and I don't know if we would survive. So it has saved us in its own way. And yet, while technology is serving a good in this current pandemic, I still think, and I think it has, because of technology, we're more attentive, of course, to what's happening in the world in terms of the pandemic, in terms of global warming. So it's not about technology per se. The technology is very helpful to our care for, it can be very helpful in raising our awareness, but then we have to take the next steps, and we need things other than technology. We need practices like contemplation. We need a sense of belonging together. We need a deep sense of commitment and community where religion might play a role. So I guess maybe to balance your question, technology says we can do it all. And I'm saying, no, technology cannot do it all. It can play a vital role in helping us develop a better world, but we need other things. We need prayer, we need God, we need one another, and we need the earth itself. And we need to find a way to bring all these things into a balance in our lives, into an integrated whole.
Well, that sounds like a great note to end it on. So, Sister Ilia, thank you so much for the lecture and for the conversation and for answering all of the great questions.
It's great questions, yeah.
Real pleasure
Wonderful students.
to have the night with you.